All right, ladies, happy Tuesday, last Tuesday of every month. We do our team Zoom call and I go over a couple topics of education, give you guys a chance to ask me questions live. So there's definitely some benefit of tuning in live because I can answer personal questions for you. Great example being last month, I went over the TDEE calculator and talked about reverse dieting and how to get back to a maintenance diet. Very interesting. I had probably the most questions ever after the call. Lots of direct messages through Train Heroic, trying to figure out where your calories should be at. And that's kind of what sparked the conversation of what I want to talk about today is getting back to the basics. And while I absolutely love that our team is growing, continually growing, a lot of times women that are just hopping in kind of miss the basics. And if they just get wind of some of these higher topics, upper level topics without understanding the basics of where I come from in regards to food and exercise, then it can be difficult to wade through. So we're going over basics today. Ask your questions as we go, and I hope this is helpful. So we're gonna crank it off with we're gonna talk about food, and I actually made a PowerPoint recently for another group of ladies I was working with. And it's a pretty condensed PowerPoint that I feel like can be pretty helpful. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. I'm assuming everyone can see this. Okay. So let's just go ahead and get started. But basically, what we're going to talk about, this is just, again, this is for another institution that I was helping with. I was helping with a pregnancy center. But a couple things that I want to talk about first is understanding and knowing your body and what that looks like. The cycles that we should be in, what I call anabolic cycles versus catabolic cycles. Anabolic cycles meaning that your body is rebuilding and repairing. You're gaining more muscle mass, you're sleeping, you are healthy, you're happy, you have a good libido. If you're in your menstrual years or your reproductive years and you have a good menstrual cycle, if you're in your perimenopausal years, and that means that you're managing and mitigating a lot of those secondary symptoms that come with perimenopause, including abdominal weight gain, hot flashes, insomnia, those types of things. But if we're going to talk about the positive side of what that could look like for you, it's going to look like this cycle here. So the first is what I call filling the tank. We're eating enough food and we're eating enough protein. That gives us the energy to then strength train and be aerobically fit through walking 8 to 12,000 steps per day. That exercise then promotes better sleep patterns because then at least we're tired. So we have eaten we've fueled up our tank through the food. We've used that fuel through strength training. We're then putting ourselves back into rest and digest, our parasympathetic nervous system. So we're coming back down, ideally with good sleep, having good sleep hygiene. And then the main outcome is that we're having a really healthy and balanced body composition, and the body wants to rebuild and repair. Now, on the flip side, your catabolic cycle, which is the next slide here, is a cycle where your body is constantly in a state of breaking down or constantly in a state of fight or flight or starvation or starvation rather than abundance, lots of trickle down effects. And if we understand our bodies in light of understanding that we were created with a creator who had a design and a perfect design, then we understand that like our bodies are so complex, especially for women, because we hold the key to the next generation in regards to their health, because we are the ones that are, growing the babies, having the babies, feeding the babies, nurturing the babies. We are the ones that typically hold that opportunity and responsibility. And so what I want to encourage you with in regards to this catabolic cycle is that if you see yourself living in this one, which I'll go over in just a second, then see if there are some things within these cycles that we can change to get back to the previous that I explained here. So if this is you, then maybe take a note. But it always starts with not eating enough food. And if women are not eating enough food, then typically what happens is that you're going to have dysregulated blood sugar. And when you have dysregulated blood sugar, what happens is your female body that's supposed to be producing estrogen and progesterone then starts to produce testosterone. And so women at their worst become men kind of the attributes of men, starts producing more testosterone. You're thinking PCOS, right? Starts to become men in some sense, but in their worst fashion, not necessarily like as a man in his holistic form, right? So that's kind of like how I like to say it. And men in their worst state start to become like women at their worst state. So like men need to be men, women need to be women, right? In regards to like how we are producing our reproductive sex hormones. So dysregulated blood sugar for women starts producing testosterone. Testosterone leads to PCOS in women, or PCOS like symptoms and diabetes and arthritis and Alzheimer's, right? There's a massive trickle down effect to that. So if you're not eating enough food, you're probably going to feel pretty lethargic. So then you're moving into a sedentary lifestyle, or what I call sedentary exercisers. And we don't want to be sedentary exercisers, basically meaning we get basically 0 steps per day, but congratulations, you've checked the box of going to a Pilates class for 45 minutes, but you're sedentary and lethargic the rest of the day. From a primitive, animal-based, God-created design and this concept of like Mother Nature or how mammals operate in the world, no other mammal is a sedentary exerciser. Like that just feels a little like dystopian to me. I know that seems dramatic, but that's sometimes how I view it, where it's like we are humans that have been, roaming and walking and we've been, agriculturally minded for thousands of years, and then what, all of a sudden jazzercise comes on the scene and now we are only confined to 45 to 60 minutes. Like that seems insane to me. So we need to strength train and we need to increase our aerobic capacity. But if you live a sedentary life and you go down to that bottom bubble, typically sleep is dysregulated and disrupted, probably from your dysregulated blood sugar and lack of exercise. And then that cycles through to increased abdominal fat and irregular menstrual cycle. And that's going to be your biggest red flag. So the idea is that we should be taking this cycle, turning it back into the more anabolic rebuilding and repairing cycle. So what I like to call my view of food is I'm going to call it animal-based nutrition or animal-based centered nutrition, right? We are using the natural life cycles of plants and animals as a guide for cultivating, preparing, eating, and preserving food, seeking the most nutrient dense in both macronutrient and micronutrient. And all that means is as Christians, we are stewarders of the things that God has given us. And so we are taking the things around us, whether it's our pets, our children, our land, our livestock, our gardens, our sourdough starters, right? Everything that we have, we understand the value of it because God has given it to us to steward and to cultivate. And so we're going to think about that lens when we talk about food. And another thing to just kind of mention here is that no population on planet Earth ever since the beginning of civilization, since Adam and Eve, has, I would clarify, after the fall, we don't need to get into theology, but after the fall, no groups of people have ever just been hunters,
No.
carnivores, um, or nobody has ever just been a gatherer. Okay. And so, what I like to say with that is I'm not going to be too dogmatic about like, should we or should we not eat vegetables? Should we not eat animals? I think you know where I stand on those, but I just wanted to bring to light that I'm going to be less dogmatic about the actual items and more about the appropriate preparation of food. Now, this is my nourishing pyramid that I give a stamp of approval on. This is how I view food. Okay, so this would be really positive. At the base of this pyramid is always going to be eating enough calories. And the reason why is I'm not going to make rules if I can't extrapolate these rules to every population in the entire world. Because if you can't, it's too dogmatic in my view. Okay, because I want to be able, for example, to take this PowerPoint and give it to women who are in lower income at the pregnancy center and still have them learn from it. And then also take this PowerPoint and give it to women who have millions of dollars and they can shop at Erewhon and Whole Foods. If they don't work in both scenarios, then I think the rules are going to be too dogmatic. So, the base of this pyramid is eating enough calories. And my example for that is that's just going to be for life and survival. So if you go to any impoverished country, you go to India, you go to any country in Africa, many countries in Africa, right? What are they eating? They're probably eating rice, beans, lentils, right? And so what that looks like is, do they have a perfect amount of protein intake? No. Do they have, in turn, then, do they have a really healthy body composition? Probably not, right? But they are surviving off of rice. They are surviving off of beans. They're surviving off of lentils, right? So, like, just because you can do it doesn't mean that it's like the healthiest version for humanity, right? But I'm not going to necessarily be elitist and say, oh, somebody in India is only eating lentils, like, so I can only eat lentils. We need to have probably a scope of an idea that they're probably not living their best life eating just lentils, right? And that's okay to understand that. The second level is body composition. This is the key to body composition, is to understand your ratio of proteins to carbs to fats. And we will break that down in a minute. And then lastly is going to be food sourcing convictions. I will say this is Maha flipped upside down, right? Because here in America, we are currently really caring about our food sourcing, which I included this on this pyramid because I care. I care as a Christian. I care as, as a conservative. I care as a wife. I care as a hopefully a future mother, right? About my food sourcing convictions and the ethics behind sourcing your food. Great. I think a lot of women here also care about that. That's why you probably attracted yourself to me and working with this group. But what I want to say is that comes last, because this is what I'll say. As a strength coach and as someone who cares about body composition, because you're coming to me, talking to me about this, I'll say, okay, Sandy, you can have the best locally sourced, organic, non-GMO, no pesticide residue, yada, yada, spinach in the world. But if you're not eating enough calories from spinach and you're not getting enough protein, then you're probably not going to have the best, most well-rounded body composition or overall health. Okay. And so that is why I put food sourcing at the top, because let's take eggs, for example, because everyone always wants to ask me about eggs. Okay. One, it's like, okay, well, I can't afford the expensive eggs at the grocery store. And I'll say, okay, where are you on this pyramid? If you've like not eaten enough food for a while, buy eggs regardless of their price. Buy the white ones in the giant carton that have the pale yellow yolk. Not amazing, right? But eggs are going to be better for you than Doritos, right? And so it's going to be about eating enough macronutrient packed calories. Then go to the second level about eggs, right? Protein, carbs, and fats. Then if we want to trim our body composition a little bit, maybe we need to eat whole eggs and egg whites, getting more protein in there. And then if we're on the level 3 of the pyramid and we're taking eggs, then maybe we're seeking out a farmer's market. Now we have extra funds, time, mental capacity to put into finding a local farmer that can give you your non-GMO chickens, your non-GMO fed corn, soy chickens, right? Or eggs, I should say. So I just want to kind of clarify that pyramid here. And so what this pyramid is not, or what some of the red flags you'll see if you don't do this pyramid correctly, it's going to be here in the white boxes. Your body will be in starvation mode, which means you'll have low metabolism, low muscle mass. You're not taking care of yourself, so you will not take care of another. That's going to be, again, a basic primitive response to not eating enough, typically. Not eating enough macro and micronutrient dense food. If you're not eating enough protein, you're going to be on a blood sugar roller coaster. You're probably going to overeat your carbohydrates. Therefore, your protein, carb, and fat balance is going to be off. And then lastly, caring about food sourcing before the bottom 2 levels are accomplished, before the bottom 2 are accomplished, is still leaving you undernourished and in a suboptimal position. Okay. So if you are going on Chronometer, which is the app that I recommend tracking your food on, then this is what this practically looks like. You're doing step 1, eating enough calories. On the Chronometer, you can put in through the TDEE calculator based on what we did last week. This is going to be your first goal, is obviously meeting your overall energy need of what we talked about last month, that's going to be eating enough calories. Okay. And then obviously your protein, carbs, and fats, that will be level 2. And then level 3 is going to be like changing out, the actual ingredients, finding the least amount of ingredients with the least amount of preservatives and seed oils and things that we care about. This is a really interesting chart. I feel like I've talked about it before, but I will bring it up again. I think there's a lot of arguments about like how our macronutrients over time has changed, and a lot of people will say like, "Oh, well, we're eating more meat than we've ever been." But I want to just point out a couple things here. First is the obesity rate, which is in orange. It has obviously skyrocketed after about the 1970s. And that line looks very similar to blue, purple, and green for the most part. Blue is fat calories have slowly increased, typically because of the introduction of seed oils. Purple, total calories have increased, probably from the fat calories. And then the green is carb calories. So we can make an assumption here based on these numbers. Total calories have increased mainly because of fat, and carbohydrate calories have increased not because of protein. Okay. Now, protein, what is it? We're talking about that middle portion of that pyramid that I just went over. Protein has 1 gram. I'm sorry. 1 gram of protein has 4 calories to it. So if you have 100 grams of protein, that will equate to 400 calories within your total caloric intake. Its primary function is tissue rebuilding and repairing, not for energy. Protein is only used for energy when you're in a true starvation state and your body is eating away at your musculature because you're truly starving. An example of that is, I can't remember if I already said this, sorry, but when I did a missions trip in Africa when I was in college, we ended up only eating rice for like 3 or 4 weeks. And because I didn't eat any protein practically for a month, I came back and all of my muscles had like been completely deflated. I looked like I was like a balloon. Like if I'm talking about my glutes, like my butt, I had like strong legs and then I came back and I was like a deflated balloon. And it's because at that point I was so like calorically starved that my body was eating away at the protein for energy. But it was because I was in a starvation state from that standpoint. Protein is satiating and balances blood sugar. It's not an efficient energy source, but animal sources of protein have all of your amino acids available to you, whereas plant sources do not. And also, plant sources of protein, you're probably thinking rice and beans, sourdough, pea protein, soy protein. You do not have all of your amino acids within that complex. So it's really important that you get it from animal-based sources. And the general daily protein goals should be 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. And the reason why I say that is because if you are 200 pounds and you feel your best at around 150, then you should be shooting for 150 grams of protein, and vice versa. If you are 100 pounds and you would probably feel your best at 125, just having a little bit more muscle on you, then you should be eating 125 grams of protein. Something that's really important to understand is that the protein leverage hypothesis comes from this idea that the more protein you eat, the less carbohydrates and fats you will eat because your body knows like the limit and the capacity of how much protein you need for living and daily life. So once you've hit that number, your body will then downregulate how hungry you are. For example, if you sit down and eat a steak, you're eating a lot of protein. You're going to be pretty full, happy, satiated from the steak because it's really protein packed. Whereas if you sat down and ate a bag of chips, there's very little protein within that bag of chips. And so it will not stop that hunger signal until it's reached theoretically the same amount of protein that you would have eaten in a steak, right? But you're going to have overall less calories because a steak is primarily protein, where the bag of chips has a little bit of protein, lots of carbs, lots of fats, but now you're eating 3 bags of chips to equal 1 steak. So the idea is we should be eating the most nutrient dense foods because overall, over time, you'll end up eating less calorically like a lot of calories and not a lot of nutrient dense foods. Quick overview of protein sources, always choose animal sources. That's also going to be accompanied by healthy fats, which is what we want, whereas plant sources do not contain all of our amino acids. Very similar example here. You can compare a sirloin steak to kidney beans. You're going to have to eat a lot more kidney beans and more calories in order to meet the need of protein rather than just eating a steak, and you're going to get it pretty quick. Carbs. Carbs in regards to grams and calories is the same as protein, but carbs are a very efficient energy source and it's stored in your muscles and in your liver. So when you eat carbohydrates, your body will fill up the stores in your muscles. It will take that excess, store up your liver full of them, and then if you have excess after that, then your body will convert them to fat and will pack them onto your midsection. Okay. So if you have a lot of weight gain going on in your abdomen, a lot of times that's a pretty sure sign signal that you are either overeating your carbohydrates or you need more muscle mass. Typically, it's both because the more muscle mass you have, the more ability to store and utilize carbohydrates you have because it's like a storage container. The more you can pack in there and utilize then for your training. If you remember, fill the tank, drain the tank from the beginning, that's the whole goal. Carbs are burned when your heart rate is really high and then also in the weight room. So when we're strength training, we're typically burning carbohydrates, but that's much better long term because then we get something in return. We get more muscle mass, use more carbohydrates, we eat more carbohydrates, we build the metabolism and it trickles up, and that's what we want. Okay. This illustration kind of has to do with like preparation of carbohydrates. A lot of it has to do with grains and sourdough, which is a lot of us probably our primary source of carbohydrates. So what I would say is that any nut, seed, stalk, leaf, root needs to be prepared correctly. And this is like a rabbit hole that we could go down, but I've got a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to keep on rolling. The main difference between fruits and veggies, fruits come from the flowering part of the plant. Veggies come from leaves, stalks, roots, and seeds. And so a lot of times vegetables need to be cooked down really well in order to eat them without becoming super gassy. Fats. Fats are very calorically dense, 9 calories per 1 gram. And they also are accompanied by our fat soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K. Very important. Fat coming from animals is also cholesterol. You cannot get cholesterol from plant sources. And cholesterol is the backbone for estrogen and progesterone production. So if you have dysregulated hormones, if you're going through perimenopause and you're already lessening your amount of estrogen and progesterone, or if your husband has a testosterone problem and he needs to increase his testosterone, then same for him. He needs to be eating more cholesterol, more animal-based fats. Fat also adds adds flavor to food. If you ever watch MasterChef, they always talk about that like color is flavor, fat is flavor. The color you get from food, typically from the fat, like rendering down fat or frying something in butter, right? And that's also where you're going to get the flavor. Fat is also very important because it lines our nervous system and our brain. And the general daily goal of fat intake is 75 to 85 grams for women, 100 grams for men, and 100 grams for women who are breastfeeding. My favorite forms of fat sources are always going to be ghee, butter, ground beef, whole eggs, tallow, salmon, things like that. Plant sources should typically come from fruit oils, not vegetable oils. So avocados, coconuts, and olives are actually fruits. And so those oils are pretty decent. Whereas nuts and seed oils are vegetable oils, typically rancid, oxidize, and increase inflammation over time. And then I don't know if we really need to talk about food sourcing because all of us women here probably pretty know this, but food sourcing convictions look like shopping local, shopping regenerative, organic if we can, pasture raised, non-GMO, because we're good stewards of the land and we care about that. Some basic grocery store shopping tips. Obviously shop on the outsides of the grocery store. Don't overthink your recipes for dinner. Always combine maybe salad, meat, and fruit. That's always like a solid option there. I always try to buy some pre-cooked meats. So like find a good quality like chicken apple sausage or deli meat or salami or something that you don't actually have to cook. That's nice to have on hand. Cook in animal fats. So practice cooking in butter and tallow and lard. And then for your snacks, instead of grabbing like granola bars, I would really advise you grabbing like beef sticks and like Parmesan cheese or something like that. Um, whew! That was 27 minutes of full talking. Okay, I'm going to take 5-second pause and review the chat, and then I'll go from there. Okay, answer whenever. Would love some direction for progressing and weight if a movement is programmed for 2 months. For example, okay, cool. Any questions about food before I move on to the exercise questions? I'll wait for a couple minutes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and answer your question. We're going to transition to exercise. Um, Okay, question was, would love some direction for progressing in weight if a movement is programmed for 2 months. For example, if front squats were programmed in February and I ended the last block at 125, what weight would I start off if front squats were programmed for March? Would I start where I ended at 125, or would I drop the weight to start off and then build over the month of March? Hopefully this makes sense. Thank you for the question. Great question. Um, the latter half of your question is the correct answer. So, if I have something programmed for, let's say, 3 months, okay, I'm going to use my fingers as an example here so that you guys hopefully like see like what I'm doing. But the idea is that the first week of the program is called the deload week, and that's really when I only have 2 sets of something. You are you are trying out typically new movements, or you're just giving your body kind of a reset time, and then we can kind of build from there. So let's say you do front squats and you start front squats, and over the course of the weeks, you build up your weight like you're supposed to, which is great. But then you hit another deload week and I still have front squats there. Then yes, you technically should drop down in weight to give your body a little bit of rest because you still need that deload week, and then you're going to build again. So let's say you build up to 125, then technically on week 5, which is the following week 1, right, of the new card, then let's say you drop down to 100 and then you build up, and then the end of that card or the end of that month, you're ending at 140. Then the next month, you start the next card. Maybe I have front squats again. We're continuing to build, right? But you're still on a deload week. So then you go from 140 down to 130 because you're still deloading relative to the card you just finished or the month you just finished. But if you compare it to the very first card, you're still higher than 125. So over time, you're progressing like this. So you're building and then you're deloading, but then you're building and then you're deloading, and you're building and then you're deloading. So at some point, your deloads at the very end are probably going to be heavier than even your heaviest set that you did at the very beginning of trying it out. But again, that's kind of how your body does that progressive overload. Got it. Makes so much sense. Thank you. Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. Um, so that kind of speaks to the larger idea behind progressive overload. Now, I want us to understand that there is a difference between health and performance, right? They obviously have some overlap and some bleeding room in the middle, but health is we're playing the long game, right? I see your question, Alyssa. I'll answer that in just a second. We're playing the long game, okay? Whereas performance is you have a race on this day. You have a competition on this day. You are doing XYZ on this day, right? And again, that will overlap because as amateur, whatever we are, amateur CrossFitters, amateur cyclists, whatever we are, right? Maybe we'll still like train up for a half marathon or something, and that's great, right? But we're playing the long game in regards to health. So what I say in regards to progressive overload is that you need to be progressing week by week, month by month, card by card, in whatever fashion. And I'll be honest, I don't really care if it's in weight, if it's in repetitions, if it's in modality or skill or in aerobic fitness. It's all about just making yourself better one step at a time. We can dabble in performance, understanding the fact that our goal is to have stronger, more resilient muscles. So at the end of the day, should our weight be going up? Yes, eventually. Should our accessories, maybe our push-ups and our sit-ups and our pull-ups, should those numbers be getting higher? Yes, absolutely. Right? But in regards to like overthinking how our progression should be, if you're progressing 5 pounds each month, amen, sister. Have at it. I would not worry about it too much. Okay, Alyssa, I'll answer your question so that I don't forget it. You have a food question. I'm curious about fasting. If we are fasting for spiritual reasons weekly, like not eating food until dinner, do you have any suggestions around that regarding how to eat the days around our fast and exercise? You know, it's really interesting. I never thought I would get so many questions around fasting, but we are some praying women, I will say. Okay. I get this question more than you would think. Typically what I say is if you're doing it for health reasons, strictly health reasons, weight loss reasons, terrible reason to be fasting. You should not be fasting, right? If you're doing it for spiritual reasons, then let's try to set you up for success. And the biggest thing behind fasting, specifically for spiritual reasons, where I'm going to give that caveat, I would say that the most important thing is going to be what meal and how much protein you're intaking on the meal that you're choosing to break your fast with. So if you're not eating all day because you are doing it for spiritual reasons and then you're breaking your fast with pizza and pasta, probably not great. But what I would say is that the latest study came out and said that even a meal with 100 grams of protein showed positive anabolic effects. Basically meaning you can't really top off with you can't overdo protein intake. So what I'll take from that is that be really mindful of the meal that you're choosing to break your fast with. And if you're doing it surrounding like a Sabbath with your family or something like that, then I would say choose the steak, choose a good chicken breast, choose something that's heavy on the protein and not just super carb filled, especially for women, because you would just be perpetuating a blood sugar roller coaster at that point rather than again signaling back to your body, hey, protein's here, we don't need to eat away our muscles, right? Just from a strictly physiological standpoint. I hope that helps, Alyssa, but I would say you could do the same for the day prior too, is have a really balanced meal with proteins, carbs, and fats and have a lot of protein. Really prioritize that leading into your fast and then break your fast with a meal that's heavy on the protein as well will be really helpful because if you just do the carbohydrates, you're going to be probably all over the place. Okay, I have 4 minutes, but I'm going to share my screen one more time. And go over. Oops, I don't know how to get out of here now. Uh-oh, hold on. There we go. Okay. I wanted to show you guys this chart here. RPE scale based on reps in reserve. And basically what that means is if I give you a rated perceived exertion, which is RPE, you're like, Kelsey, I have no idea what a 9 out of 10 feels like. You can also kind of use this chart to understand reps in reserve, which basically mean how many more reps do you feel like you have in the tank. So for example, if I give you a bench press activity and you are supposed to be at a 9 out of 10 or maybe 90%, right? That should feel like you have 1 rep in reserve and then you could stop there too. So these are not going to be exact. These are not going to be perfect, but if you're a beginner strength trainer or strength somebody that's kind of new to this, then I would start looking at these. And over time, we should learn that we can push ourselves harder in the weight room a set can be a 10 out of 10 RPE, but we can adapt to that and have progressive overload and not be as sore the next day. And you can max out, or you can do 9 out of 10 and have one rep in reserve and really understand what that feels like. But again, if we're playing the long term, then it's okay. You should be choosing heavier weights over time. You should be pushing your repetitions on body weight exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, right? Those repetitions should be going up over time. You should be able to walk more steps over time, complete more distance and amount of time doing aerobic training over time, right? And so that's the progress that I want to keep us set on rather than just like zooming in and like fine-tuning these really minute details. We kind of lose like the whole picture around like why we should be exercising in the first place. And it's not to be sedentary exercisers, and it's not to be um making like this an idol or anything like that. So I just simply typed in RPE to reps in reserve on Google, and I found this chart. So you are more than probably pretty capable of finding this yourself. Okay. I have a minute and a half until it's going to boot me off. I'm going to take a breather and I'll wait that minute and a half if anybody has any last minute questions for me.
I have another random question.
Yes.
I saw on that slide about protein that it's not an efficient source of energy. So I'm
Correct.
just curious how people who do carnivore diet, like how does that work if they're not consuming carbs? How are they getting enough energy?
They are through protein. They are.
Okay.
But that is just not the most efficient way to do it. Meaning that your body has to take protein and has to break it down and digest it a certain way and combine it with a certain thing in your stomach and then break it down in your intestines and then absorb it here and then change it into fat and then change it into carbohydrate, then change it into pyruvate and then change it into ATP, right? There's like 12,000 million steps. It can be done, obviously, right? But in regards to like what your body wants to use efficiently, it's not an efficient source of energy, if that makes sense.
Okay. So would you say that for our diet is fruit one of like the best sources of